A delicate mist clung to the peaks of the Bridger Range on that September morning. The crisp Montana air heralded the arrival of autumn as Olivia Bennett adjusted her pack in the college M Trail parking lot. At 35, the Montana State University anthropology professor had made these morning hikes a sacred routine before her Thursday classes. "Be back before noon," she texted her colleague Diana. "Have to prep for the afternoon symposium." She tucked her phone into a side pocket, settled her signature red scarf around her neck, and began her ascent. The forecast hadn't called for rain, but in Montana, the mountain weather could turn with capricious speed. Olivia knew this well after 5 years in Bozeman. She had chosen a less traveled path, a spur off the main trail that few hikers frequented. She cherished the solitude it offered, the space to organize her thoughts as she mentally prepared her lectures. A mile away, in a small cabin with a privileged view of the mountains, Marcus Caldwell watched the trailhead through a pair of high-powered binoculars. His presence there was no coincidence. He had meticulously studied Olivia's patterns for months, learning her schedules, her favorite routes, even the brand of coffee she bought each morning near campus. On the cabin table, a laptop displayed the university website, where Olivia smiled beside her academic biography. Next to it lay local newspaper clippings from interviews about her research on funerary rituals in rural communities of the American West. Marcus ran his fingers over her printed image, like one caressing a precious object. "Today will be different, Olivia," he murmured, stowing the binoculars in a black tactical backpack. "Today, everything changes." In Olivia's apartment, the silence was broken only by the occasional hum of the refrigerator. On her desk, half-graded exams and a still warm cup of tea suggested an imminent return. A framed photograph showed Olivia with her parents at her doctoral graduation. On the kitchen calendar, the day was marked, Conference 4 p.m., Thompson Auditorium. Meanwhile, on the trail, Olivia had reached a natural overlook with a panoramic view of Bozeman. She pulled out her camera to photograph the valley just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The sky, which moments before had shown only scattered clouds, was now darkening rapidly with the threat of a storm. "Damn it," she muttered, hastily putting her camera away. "I'll have to get down faster than planned." Just as she turned to head back, a rustle in the trees caught her attention. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she called out, her eyes scanning the dense vegetation now blurred by the intensifying rain. Marcus emerged from a side path wearing a waterproof jacket with a national park logo. His face, partially hidden by the hood, wore a reassuring smile. "Park Ranger," he said simply, flashing a badge that Olivia didn't have time to examine closely. "There's a thunderstorm moving in. We're evacuating the trails for safety." "Thank you. I was just heading down," Olivia replied, feeling a momentary sense of relief at the presence of authority. "I know a shortcut that will get us to the parking lot faster," he offered, pointing to a barely visible path between the trees. "This area can get dangerous in a storm." Olivia hesitated. Something in the man's gaze sparked an instinctive warning, but the first clap of thunder echoing through the mountains dispelled her doubts. The rain was now a downpour, hampering visibility. "Okay, thank you," she agreed, following the supposed ranger. As they ventured deeper onto the increasingly faint trail, Olivia began to feel that something was wrong. The path seemed to lead away from the parking lot, not toward it. When she tried to pull out her phone to check her location, she saw she had no signal. "Excuse me, but I think we're going the wrong way," she began, stopping abruptly. When she looked up, she saw that Marcus had taken something from his pocket. The metallic glint of a syringe caught Olivia's eye for a fraction of a second before she felt a sharp prick in her neck. Panic seized her. She tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of another thunderclap. Her legs began to buckle as a heavy numbness spread through her body. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was Marcus's transformed face, watching her with a disturbing intensity as her red scarf slipped from her neck, floating briefly in the air before settling on the muddy trail. 6 hours later, Professor Diana Jackson was dialing Olivia's number for the 12th time, her eyes fixed anxiously on the clock. The Thompson Auditorium was filled with students and colleagues waiting for a lecture that would never begin. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky that stood in stark contrast to the darkness about to descend on Bozeman. Deep in a forest on the outskirts of the city, Marcus Caldwell drove his truck down a barely visible dirt road. In the back, covered by a tarp, lay Olivia Bennett, unconscious, oblivious to the fate that awaited her in a bunker meticulously built for years beneath the earth. A place where time would stop for her, while the world outside began a search that would stretch on for 2 long years. The news of Olivia Bennett's disappearance struck Bozeman like an earthquake. Within 24 hours, her smiling face adorned every lamppost, every shop window, and every screen in the small university town. Sheriff Robert Tanner, a 30-year veteran of the department, had seen disappearances before, but something about this case tied a knot in his stomach. "We need to focus on the Bridger Range area," he instructed his team, gathered in the station's conference room. "Parking lot logs confirm her vehicle is still there. Last contact was a text at 8:43 a.m. to her colleague, Dr. Jackson." The initial search mobilized over 200 volunteers. Students, professors, local residents, and specialized teams systematically combed every trail, every ravine, and every creek. On the 3rd day, when a park ranger found Olivia's red scarf snagged on a bush near an unofficial trail, hope mingled with unease. "She was here," Diana Jackson murmured, holding the scarf that the sheriff showed her in an evidence bag. But why would she take this route? Olivia knew these mountains. She would never deviate from the main trail, especially with bad weather. A few miles away, Marcus Caldwell blended in with a group of volunteers searching the northern sector. With his state parks department cap and helpful demeanor, no one questioned his presence. He even offered his expertise in GPS systems to help coordinate the digital search. "I've mapped this area for years," he explained to one of the officers, unfolding a detailed map. "I know every nook where someone could get disoriented during the storm." As national news cameras began to arrive in Bozeman, Olivia was slowly regaining consciousness in a cold, artificially lit space. The reinforced concrete walls and low ceiling triggered an immediate sense of claustrophobia. She tried to move but found her ankles shackled to the metal frame of a bed. "Help! Somebody help me!" She screamed with all her might, but her voice seemed to be absorbed by the walls, as if the space were designed to contain sound. A mechanical hum caught her attention. In a corner, a ventilation system operated silently. Beside it, a security camera was pointed directly at her, its blinking red light confirming it was active. The room, roughly 4 by 5 meters, contained the bed, a small doorless bathroom, and a metal table and chair, both bolted to the floor. On the table sat an untouched tray of food, a sandwich, an apple, and a sealed bottle of water. Next to it was a book, Forensic Anthropology, Contemporary Advances, one of the texts Olivia had cited in her latest academic paper. The sound of unlocking bolts startled her. A metal door she hadn't noticed before swung open, revealing Marcus, now out of his ranger uniform, dressed simply in jeans and a gray t-shirt. "You're finally awake, Professor Bennett," he said with a familiarity that chilled Olivia's blood. "I hope you find your accommodations suitable. I designed them with you in mind." "Who are you? Why are you keeping me here?" Olivia demanded, fighting the terror that threatened to paralyze her. "I'm surprised you don't remember me," he replied, approaching slowly. I attended 3 of your lectures last semester. I even asked a question about Mesoamerican funerary rituals that you praised as insightful. On the surface, the search for Olivia continued, but hope dwindled with each passing day. Subsequent storms had erased any trace she might have left. After 2 weeks, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. The leading theory was that Olivia had been caught in the storm, become disoriented, and suffered a fatal accident in some inaccessible ravine. Olivia's father, Dr. James Bennett, a professor emeritus of literature at Berkeley, posted a $50,000 reward for information. Her mother, Eleanor, moved to Bozeman, refusing to leave the city until her daughter was found. "My Olivia is alive," she insisted in every interview, with a conviction that moved even the most hardened skeptics. "I know her. She's smart and strong. If she'd had an accident, we would have found some evidence by now." By late November, when the first snow blanketed the mountains, the active search was officially suspended. The case would remain open, but resources were redirected. Olivia's apartment became a silent sanctuary maintained by Diana, who refused to let the university reassign her friend's teaching position. In his underground bunker, meticulously constructed over 5 years on a remote property inherited from his grandfather, Marcus had established a routine with his captive. He provided her with 3 meals a day, academic books, and occasionally allowed her to write in a notebook, always under his strict supervision. "We are intellectual soulmates," he would explain with a disturbing calm. "No one appreciates your brilliance the way I do. Here you can focus exclusively on your work, without the distractions of academic life." For Olivia, days bled into weeks and weeks into blurred months. With no access to the outside world or natural light, her only markers of time were Marcus's visits, and a small calendar he updated daily like a macabre gift. During the day, she forced herself to stay physically and mentally active. She exercised in the limited space, mentally reviewed academic articles, and recited poetry she had memorized. At night, when she knew Marcus was asleep, she meticulously explored her prison, searching for structural weaknesses, studying the patterns of the ventilation system, and memorizing the faint external sounds that occasionally penetrated the insulation. One night, while pretending to sleep, she watched Marcus place something in a small, hidden compartment in the wall. After he left, Olivia waited a full hour before investigating. The compartment held a metal box secured with a digital lock, impossible to open without the combination. For months, Olivia built her silent resistance. On the seemingly innocuous pages of her notebook, between anthropological analyses, she concealed a mental map of her captivity, notes on Marcus's habits, and an escape plan she constantly refined. "Do you know what day it is?" Marcus asked one morning, 6 months after her abduction, placing a muffin with a small candle in front of her. "Why should I care?" Olivia replied, maintaining the facade of indifference she had cultivated as a survival mechanism. "It's your birthday, Olivia. You're 36. Marcus smiled, lighting the candle. "You should be grateful. In the world outside, they already consider you dead." Meanwhile, in Bozeman, life went on. The university had placed a memorial plaque in the anthropology department. Sheriff Tanner kept the case file on his desk, reviewing it occasionally with the nagging feeling that they had missed something. Diana Jackson had temporarily taken over Olivia's professorship, beginning each class with a brief mention of her missing colleague. And Eleanor Bennett, now a permanent resident of Bozeman, held monthly vigils in the Central Park, refusing to accept what everyone else seemed to have concluded, that Olivia Bennett had become another tragic mystery of the Montana mountains. What no one suspected was that less than 20 miles from the original search headquarters, buried under 10 feet of earth carefully disguised with native vegetation, Olivia Bennett was still fighting for her freedom, silently marking each day in her mind, waiting for the one chance she would need to escape. or at least to ensure that Marcus Caldwell would pay for what he had done. Time takes on a liquid quality when you live underground. For Olivia, the days began to merge into a suffocating continuum. Yet her analytical mind continued to map patterns, searching for cracks in her captor's meticulous routine. After 8 months of captivity, she had confirmed that Marcus left the bunker twice a week for approximately 4 hours, presumably to gather supplies and maintain appearances in the outside world. During these absences, Olivia was locked in but left without direct surveillance, though the camera continued to run. One Tuesday in May, while Marcus was on his regular trip to a Bozeman supermarket, Olivia implemented the first phase of her plan. She had managed to extract a small metal spring from inside her mattress. For weeks she had been patiently shaping it, transforming the harmless piece of metal into a rudimentary tool. With practiced movements keeping to the camera's blind spot, she began to manipulate the lock on her shackles. The low hum of the ventilation system swallowed the faint metallic whisper of her work. After 45 minutes of tense effort, a soft click signaled success. One shackle was open. The sensation of a free ankle nearly brought tears of relief to her eyes, but she forced them back. There was no room for error. With methodical precision, she freed her other ankle and stood unrestricted for the first time in what felt like an eternity. A wave of dizziness washed over her, but it was quickly burned away by a surge of adrenaline. She moved directly to the hidden compartment she had discovered months ago. Lacking the tools to bypass the digital lock, she resorted to another strategy. Using the strength she had built over months of clandestine exercises, she began to wrench the entire compartment from the wall. The structure, though solid, began to groan and give way. When she finally pried it partially loose, something fell to the floor with a metallic clink. Her hands trembled as she retrieved it, an ornate brooch, the initials EB engraved on the back. Her mother's brooch, Eleanor Bennett's, the one Olivia had been wearing the day she was taken. With no time to process the discovery, she continued her frantic exploration. The main door was electronically sealed, impossible to open without a code. But Olivia had been watching, counting, analyzing every detail of the bunker. She knew there had to be a secondary exit. Building regulations, even for clandestine structures like this, made a single-exit subterranean facility unthinkable. In the bathroom, she began to meticulously inspect the seams between the metal floor plates. In the farthest corner, she found a slight variation in the pattern. Pushing with all her might, she managed to shift one of the plates, revealing the edge of what looked like an emergency hatch. The distant sound of an engine froze her in place. Marcus was returning, far earlier than expected. In a flurry of motion, Olivia slid the plate back into position and scrambled back to the bed, arranging the shackles to appear locked while remaining easy to open. She concealed the brooch and her makeshift tool in a small slit she had carved into the mattress. When Marcus entered, Olivia was pretending to read one of the books he had provided. He watched her for a moment longer than usual, sending a cold shiver of fear down her spine. Had he noticed something? "I brought you something special today," he announced finally, placing a newspaper on the table. "I thought you might be interested to see how the world remembers you." Olivia held her breath as she saw the front page of the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. A small article in the bottom corner announced a memorial ceremony for the first anniversary of her disappearance. Beside the text was a photograph of her parents holding a picture of her. "No one is looking for you anymore, Olivia," Marcus whispered, moving closer until he was sitting on the edge of the bed. "Only I know you're alive. Only I care about your well-being." On the surface, Sheriff Tanner was facing pressure to officially close the case. Resources were limited and new crimes demanded attention. Yet something still bothered him, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. Run the list of volunteers from the search party again, he told his deputy. I want to know if anyone had specific knowledge of the area or any relevant skills. The request, which would have seemed standard a year ago, now felt like the last desperate act of an officer who couldn't let go of a cold case. But Tanner's intuition, honed by decades of experience, rarely failed him. Meanwhile, Deanna Jackson had established a small foundation in Olivia's name, offering scholarships to anthropology students. While organizing a fundraising event, she found herself sifting through old photographs. In a group picture from an academic symposium held 3 months before the disappearance, she noticed something she had overlooked. A man in the background, partially obscured, was staring directly at Olivia as she gave her presentation. Deanna enlarged the digital photo, trying to identify him. Something about his posture, the sheer intensity of his gaze, triggered an instinctive alarm. She printed the image and took it to the sheriff's office personally. It's probably nothing, she admitted, handing the photograph to Tanner. But this man, he shows up in several photos from academic events, always watching Olivia, never interacting with anyone else. The sheriff examined the image with renewed interest. Do you have any more photos where he appears? Back at my office, Deanna replied. I've been digitizing all the files related to Olivia for the foundation. Back in the bunker, Marcus was showing growing signs of agitation. Local news had mentioned the possibility of new construction in nearby rural areas, part of Bozeman's urban expansion. The noise of heavy machinery had become an occasional unwelcome sound, each time a little closer to his property. We'll have to consider alternatives, he muttered to himself as he reviewed blueprints on his laptop, oblivious to Olivia watching his screen intently, memorizing details that might prove crucial. What Marcus didn't know was that Olivia had managed to permanently disable her shackles. She could now move freely whenever he was gone. She had explored every inch of the bunker, confirming that the emergency hatch led to a narrow tunnel. During one of these explorations, she had made a disturbing discovery, a second hidden compartment, this one hermetically sealed. Using her improvised tool, she managed to pry it open, revealing its contents. Photographs, dozens of them, not just of her, but of other women. Some appeared to be clippings from local newspapers, others were clearly candid shots taken without the subject's knowledge. With a growing sense of horror, Olivia recognized one of the women, Catherine Mercer, a park ranger whose disappearance had been regional news 3 years ago. According to the reports, she had abandoned her post voluntarily, leaving a resignation letter. But in the photographs, Catherine was in everyday situations, completely unaware she was being watched. The revelation hit Olivia like an avalanche. She wasn't the first, and if she didn't escape, she wouldn't be the last. At the sheriff's department, a young officer was meticulously entering data on all the volunteers who had participated in Olivia's search. When he got to Marcus Caldwell, something caught his eye. Sheriff, this guy listed himself as a systems engineer specializing in GPS, but his address doesn't match any registered in the county. He does, however, own a parcel of land about 20 kilometers from the original search area. Tanner examined the file with sharp interest. Did we verify this at the time? According to the notes, he provided a contact address in Bozeman, an apartment on Oak Street. When they tried to contact him 3 weeks later to thank him for his participation, the building manager said he'd moved out with no forwarding address. The sheriff's brow furrowed as he connected the invisible dots. I want all available information on this Caldwell, property, employment, background, everything, and get me a warrant to search that rural parcel. Thousands of miles away in Berkeley, Eleanor Bennett awoke with a start from a nightmare. In her dream, Olivia was trapped underground, pounding on a metal ceiling, trying to be heard. With trembling hands, Eleanor reached for the phone and dialed Sheriff Tanner's number. I know this sounds irrational, she admitted after explaining her dream. But there's something I never mentioned. The day Olivia disappeared, she lost a family brooch, an antique piece with my initials. It was her good luck charm. She never went hiking without it. If she'd lost it in an accident, it should have turned up with her scarf or somewhere nearby. Tanner, who would normally dismiss such premonitions, found this piece of information strangely relevant. "Can you send me a photograph of that brooch, Mrs. Bennett?" The investigation into Marcus Caldwell was beginning to reveal disturbing inconsistencies. His supposed employment at a tech firm was a fabrication. His credit history showed substantial purchases of construction materials and industrial ventilation equipment over the past 6 years. And most damning of all, he had been briefly investigated in connection with Catherine Mercer's disappearance, but was dismissed as a suspect when her supposed resignation letter was found. As the net began to tighten on the surface, deep underground, Olivia was finalizing her escape plan. She had memorized Marcus's patterns, identified the optimal moment, and studied the possible routes she could take once she emerged from the tunnel. What neither of them knew was that, less than a kilometer away, an excavator was beginning to tear into the earth to install new power lines, moving inexorably closer to the subterranean bunker that would soon cease to be a secret. The Montana sun shone with an unusual intensity that June morning. The excavator operator, Dave Wilkins, noticed something strange about the terrain he was clearing. A rectangular section of ground wasn't behaving like the rest of the soil. It seemed artificially compacted, and the vegetation grew in a pattern too uniform to be natural. "Hey, Mike, come take a look at this," he called to his supervisor, stopping the machine. "I think there's something built down here." Mike Peterson, a man with 25 years in construction, knew at once that this was no natural formation. "Shut it all down," he ordered, pulling out his phone. "We're going to need additional permits before we go any further." 5 kilometers away, in the sheriff's office, Robert Tanner was reviewing the comprehensive file they had managed to assemble on Marcus Caldwell. Alarm bells rang when he saw the purchase of industrial-grade air filtration equipment, enough to sustain a habitable, airtight space for years. "The warrant to search his property will be here in an hour," his deputy reported, interrupting his thoughts. "We're not waiting," Tanner decided, rising to his feet. "We have sufficient cause for an emergency welfare check on a missing person." As the sheriff's team prepared to move out, Marcus Caldwell was nervously monitoring the exterior security cameras he had strategically placed around his property. The construction activity had crept dangerously close over the past week. His instincts screamed that it was time to implement his contingency plan. "We're going to have to move, Olivia," he announced, bursting into the bunker with a metal case. "I've prepared a new place for us, more remote, safer." Olivia kept her expression neutral, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. This unexpected development could either shatter her escape plan or, paradoxically, be the very thing that made it possible. "When are we leaving?" she asked, her voice deliberately monotone, a result of months spent practicing indifference as a survival mechanism. "Tonight," he answered, opening the case to reveal several vials of liquid and a syringe. "You'll need to be sedated for the transport, for your own safety, of course." At that exact moment, Marcus's phone buzzed. He checked the notification from his security cameras, and his face contorted with barely contained panic. A sheriff's department SUV had just turned onto his property. "Change of plans," he muttered, slamming the case shut. "We're leaving right now." On the surface, Sheriff Tanner and 2 deputies were cautiously approaching the modest cabin that served as the facade for Marcus's operation. Simultaneously, the call from the construction workers had dispatched another police team to the excavation site. "Sheriff, we've got a call from Montana Electric," the radio crackled. Their crew found what looks like an unauthorized underground structure less than a kilometer from the Caldwell property. Tanner felt the final pieces of the puzzle lock into place. Hold your position. We're on our way. Send backup. Inside the bunker, Marcus was working frantically at a hidden control panel. I always had an escape plan, Olivia, he explained with a disturbing calm as he keyed in a series of codes. A secondary route that no one knows. What Marcus didn't know was that Olivia, during her secret explorations, had discovered and memorized every aspect of the bunker, including this very panel. She knew exactly what he was doing, activating a self-destruct system designed to collapse the main entrances, erasing all evidence while they escaped through a secondary tunnel. I need you to stay calm, he continued, approaching her with the prepared syringe. This will just make you sleep during the move. Olivia nodded meekly, presenting her arm. As Marcus leaned in to administer the injection, she executed the move she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. With calculated precision, she deflected the syringe and plunged it deep into her captor's thigh, depressing the plunger completely. The surprise on Marcus's face quickly gave way to rage, then confusion, and finally panic as the powerful sedative began to take hold. He staggered, fumbling for the weapon at his waist, but his movements were already clumsy and uncoordinated. You can't, he stammered, sinking to his knees. I can and I will, Olivia replied, her voice clear and strong as she finally cast off her shackles. With swift movements, she used the very same chains to secure Marcus, who was now struggling weakly against the drug's overwhelming effect. Wasting no time, Olivia took the electronic key from Marcus's pocket and went to the control panel. The self-destruct sequence was already initiated. She had less than 10 minutes before the strategically placed charges would detonate. Instead of trying to stop the process, she went directly to the emergency hatch she had discovered months before. Before opening it, she darted back to the secret compartment and retrieved all the photographs of the other women, along with her mother's brooch. Evidence. The escape tunnel was narrow, ascending at a steep angle. Olivia pushed forward with grim determination, ignoring the ache in her atrophied muscles and the scrapes from the rough-hewn walls. After what felt like an eternity, but was in reality less than 5 minutes, she reached a second hatch. As she pushed it open, natural light blinded her for a moment. For the first time in over a year, Olivia Bennett breathed fresh air. She felt the breeze on her face and saw the vast Montana sky. She emerged into a small, wooded clearing, several hundred meters from where the construction workers had discovered the main structure. Disoriented but resolute, she began to walk toward the distant sound of machinery. Almost at the same instant, a series of muffled explosions rumbled deep underground. The shockwaves that pulsed through the soil nearly threw her from her feet. The bunker was collapsing just as Marcus had planned. Only he wasn't inside to make his escape. Dave Wilkins was the first to see her, a staggering figure emerging from the trees, pale as a specter, clutching a sheaf of documents to her chest. "My God, there's someone there!" he yelled, sprinting toward her, his supervisor right behind him. "My name is Olivia Bennett," she managed to articulate before her legs finally gave out. "I've been held captive. Underground. There are more victims." When Sheriff Tanner arrived on the scene minutes later, he found Olivia conscious but exhausted, surrounded by the construction workers who had given her water and a jacket to ward off the shock. "Professor Bennett," Tanner said, his voice a mixture of astonishment and relief. "The entire state has been looking for you." "He's still down there," Olivia replied, handing him the photographs and the brooch. "Marcus Caldwell. And I don't think I was the only one. These women. You have to find them." As paramedics tended to Olivia, specialized teams began a frantic excavation of the collapsed area. Using ground-penetrating radar and heavy rescue equipment, they worked to locate the bunker and determine if Marcus was still alive. Diana Jackson made it to the Bozeman hospital in record time after getting the news. When she walked into the room where Olivia was being treated, words failed her. She could only embrace her friend, sobbing uncontrollably. "I always knew you were alive," she finally managed to say. "We never stopped looking, not for a single day." Eleanor and James Bennett landed in Bozeman that same night, reuniting with their daughter in a scene the local media would later describe as the miracle of Montana. The photograph of their reunion graced the front page of the Bozeman Daily Chronicle the next morning. It took rescue teams 17 hours to access the collapsed bunker. They found Marcus Caldwell alive, but severely injured, still chained just as Olivia had left him. Beside him, a partially damaged laptop held encrypted files that potentially contained information on other victims. In the weeks that followed, as Olivia began the long process of physical and psychological recovery, investigators gradually unraveled the full scope of Caldwell's crimes. Catherine Mercer had indeed been another victim, held captive for 8 months before succumbing to untreated pneumonia. Her body was found buried on the adjacent property. 2 more women were identified from Marcus's files. One had been released after 3 months when, as he had meticulously noted, she proved not to be an intellectual match. She had survived on the condition that she never speak of her captivity, terrified by his threats. The other was still missing. The case shook the community of Bozeman and captured the nation's attention. Olivia, still healing, decided her story could help others and agreed to a single exclusive interview. Not to speak of the horror, but of survival, resilience, and the importance of never losing hope. "Every day underground," she explained, her voice steady, "I told myself that one day I would see the Montana sky again. That certainty was my anchor. It was my reason to keep fighting." Meanwhile, in his maximum security cell, Marcus Caldwell awaited trial, refusing to cooperate with authorities on the whereabouts of his remaining missing victim. What he didn't know was that investigators had found a second bunker in the early stages of construction, on a property registered under one of his aliases, exactly where Olivia, using the blueprints she had memorized during her captivity, had told them it would be. Sheriff Tanner, visiting Olivia during her rehabilitation, personally returned her mother's brooch, a key piece of evidence they no longer needed to hold. "Your intelligence and your bravery saved lives, Professor Bennett. Not just your own." Olivia held the brooch in her still trembling hands, a tangible link to the life she once knew. "Sometimes," she answered softly, "surviving is the most powerful act of resistance." The Gallatin County courtroom was shrouded in a sepulchral silence as Olivia Bennett took the stand. 6 months had passed since her escape. Though her body showed clear signs of recovery, her eyes held an intensity that could intimidate even the most seasoned attorney in the room. "Professor Bennett," began the district attorney, Sarah Reeves, "could you describe for the jury the events of September 15th, 2021? With a firm, methodical voice, Olivia recounted the fateful day of her abduction. Her testimony, clinical and precise, stood in dramatic contrast to the horror of the events she described. At the defense table, Marcus Caldwell maintained a placid, almost detached expression, as if the trial for multiple counts of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and manslaughter were a mere inconvenience. "He pretended to be a park ranger," Olivia continued, looking directly at her captor for the first time since her rescue. "He used the storm to isolate me, to make me trust him, just for a moment." In the gallery, Eleanor Bennett squeezed her husband's hand, hearing for the first time the details their daughter had shielded from them. Diana Jackson, seated beside them, took meticulous notes, honoring her promise to Olivia to document everything for an eventual academic book on survival and trauma. Do you recognize this object? The DA asked, presenting the brooch with the initials EB. Yes, Olivia replied. It's my mother's brooch. I was wearing it the day I was kidnapped. I found it in a hidden compartment inside the bunker, along with photographs of other victims. When it was time for the cross-examination, the defense attorney, Richard Mercer, adopted an unexpected strategy. Instead of questioning the veracity of Olivia's testimony, he attempted to establish his client's mental instability. Professor Bennett, is it true that Mr. Caldwell spoke to you at length about what he called your intellectual connection? He asked with studied neutrality. Yes, Olivia confirmed, her composure unshaken. He believed we were, in his words, academic soulmates. He used that as a justification for why he had selected me. And did he ever mention his belief that he was protecting his victims from a world that didn't value their intellect? Objection, the DA interjected, leading the witness. I'll rephrase, Mercer conceded. Professor Bennett, in your interactions with the defendant, did he ever offer a justification for his actions? Olivia glanced briefly at the jury before answering. Marcus Caldwell constructed an elaborate narrative in which he was a protector, not a jailer. He believed the academic world was toxic for minds like mine, and that only he could provide the ideal environment for my intellectual work. She paused, then added with force. However, he was perfectly aware of the illegality and cruelty of his actions. He took meticulous precautions to avoid discovery, kept detailed records of his prior crimes, and had planned an escape method in case of emergency. Those are not the actions of someone disconnected from reality. The defense attorney could not hide his frustration at a response that had so effectively dismantled his insanity defense. Meanwhile, across Bozeman, Sheriff Tanner was personally leading the excavation at the second discovered bunker. What they found confirmed their worst fears, evidence that a third woman, Melissa Dawson, had been held captive there until recently. According to these records, a forensic technician reported, showing him a recovered notebook. Caldwell moved her somewhere about 3 months ago when he started to suspect he was being watched. That means she could still be alive, Tanner concluded, a renewed sense of urgency in his voice. Check every property linked to any known alias of Caldwell's down to the most remote contact. Back in the courtroom, the prosecution's case grew stronger with each witness. Forensic experts described the sophisticated underground bunker, highlighting the level of premeditation involved. Forensic psychologists detailed how Caldwell selected his victims according to a specific pattern. Academic women, intellectually prominent, usually with no immediate family in Montana. During a recess, Diana approached Olivia in a private witness room. "How are you holding up?" she asked, offering her a glass of water. "Better than I expected," Olivia admitted. "There's something liberating about bringing it all into the light, about turning my experience into concrete evidence that will keep him locked away." "The university is finishing up your office," Diana said, trying to steer the conversation toward normalcy. "The department voted unanimously to offer you the position of chairperson if you decide you want to return to teaching." A faint smile touched Olivia's lips. "I'm not sure what my next step is yet. For now, I'm focused on helping find Melissa." Indeed, a part of Olivia's recovery had involved working closely with investigators, using her intimate knowledge of Caldwell's methods in psychology to help locate Melissa Dawson. When the trial resumed, the courtroom was even more crowded. National media reporters filled every available space, drawn to what the press had dubbed the Bozeman bunker case. The prosecution called its final witness, Dr. Raymond Howard, a forensic psychiatrist specializing in serial predators. "Dr. Howard," the DA began, "based on your evaluation of the defendant and the evidence presented, could you describe Mr. Caldwell's psychological profile?" Marcus Caldwell presents a classic case of narcissistic personality disorder with significant elements of functional psychopathy, the specialist explained. What is distinctive in his case is the elaborate intellectual justification he constructed for his crimes. He didn't abduct for traditional sexual or violent impulse, but for a distorted perception of intellectual collecting. He saw his victims as exceptional pieces to be preserved in an environment he completely controlled. And regarding his ability to distinguish between right and wrong, the DA pressed. Absolutely intact, the doctor confirmed. His meticulous records, contingency plans, and methods of concealment demonstrate a full awareness of the criminality of his actions. His disorder does not interfere with his cognitive ability for moral discernment, only with his willingness to adhere to social norms he considers inferior to his own code. During her closing argument, DOA Reeves was direct. What we have seen in this courtroom is not just the evidence of heinous crimes, but the testimony of the extraordinary human spirit. Represented by Olivia Bennett. For 412 days of captivity, she never lost her humanity, her mental acuity, or her determination. While Marcus Caldwell was building elaborate justifications for his monstrous acts, she was patiently building her escape, and in the process, she exposed not only his past crimes but also those he was planning to commit. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, an unusually short time for such a complex case. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. During the sentencing phase a week later, Judge Harrington looked directly at Caldwell before speaking. This court has seen numerous cases of human depravity, but few have shown the level of premeditation, sustained cruelty, and absolute disregard for human dignity that you have exhibited. For the charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and manslaughter, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs escorted Caldwell from the courtroom, he paused briefly where Olivia was seated. "They'll never understand what I was trying to do," he muttered, barely audible. "I understand," Olivia replied, her voice clear, "and that understanding is what will keep you locked away forever." The search for Melissa Dawson continued with intensity. Based on patterns Olivia had identified, investigators focused their efforts on remote properties near minor academic institutions, where Caldwell could have gone unnoticed. One night, while reviewing maps in her temporary apartment, Olivia noticed something in a photograph of Caldwell taken years earlier. He was wearing a keychain with the logo of a small community college in Idaho. It was a tenuous link, but it was enough. "I think you should check properties near this campus," she suggested to Tanner over the phone. In his notes, he repeatedly mentioned the importance of keeping his collections near academic environments, as if it somehow legitimized his project. 48 hours later, in a small apartment on the outskirts of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, federal agents found Melissa Dawson alive. Weakened but conscious, she had been abandoned there with limited provisions when Caldwell was first arrested. Her survival, doctors said, was a near miracle. The news reached Olivia while she was attending her first group therapy session for survivors of severe trauma. Her phone vibrated with a message from Sheriff Tanner. "We found her. She's alive." The tears she had held back throughout the trial finally flowed freely. "Good news?" the therapist asked gently. "The best," Olivia replied. "Another survivor is coming home." 3 weeks later, in a private room at the same hospital where Olivia had begun her own recovery, two women, bound by an experience incomprehensible to most, met for the first time. "I don't know how to thank you," Melissa whispered, taking Olivia's hand. "The sheriff told me you were the one who found the connection to Idaho." "You don't have to thank me," Olivia answered. "We survived. That's our shared victory." In the months that followed, as the case continued to generate national headlines and offers for books and documentaries, Olivia made an unexpected decision. She turned down the position of department chairperson and instead founded the Bennett Center for Resilience and Trauma Studies, dedicated to researching the psychological mechanisms of survival in extreme situations. "My experience taught me that academia can do more," she explained at the center's inauguration. "We can translate trauma into knowledge, and knowledge into tools that help others survive, recover, and rebuild." The center's first case study, with the informed consent of all involved, would be a comparative analysis of the survival strategies employed by herself, Melissa Dawson, and the previous survivor, who had finally found the courage to share her story publicly. Meanwhile, in a maximum security prison, Marcus Caldwell began to write his memoirs, still convinced of the righteousness of his actions. What he didn't know was that every word he wrote only served to reinforce the psychological profile that would guarantee he would remain there forever. In Bozeman, every morning, Olivia Bennett watched the sunrise over the Bridger Range, remembering the promise she had made to herself in the darkness, that she would see the Montana sky again. It was a promise kept, one she now extended toward the future, to other survivors who, like her, would find their way back to the light. A year after the trial, Bozeman had begun to heal its collective wounds. Olivia Bennett's story had evolved from a sensationalist headline into a case study on resilience and community recovery. Yet, as is often the case with deep trauma, new layers continued to reveal themselves. The Bennett Center for the Study of Resilience and Trauma now occupied a modest, renovated building at the edge of the university campus. On that particular spring Wednesday, its conference room hosted an unusual meeting. The entire forensic team that had processed Caldwell's bunkers was gathered with Olivia and the other survivors to present their final findings. "We've completed the analysis of all recovered electronic devices," explained Dr. Lydia Cortez, an FBI digital forensics specialist. "The results are disturbing." A digital map of the United States appeared on the main screen, dotted with several red points. Each of these represents a property linked to Marcus Caldwell through false identities and complex corporate structures. 17 properties in total, Cortez continued. "So far, we've physically inspected 12. In 7, we found evidence of underground structures in various stages of construction." Melissa Dawson, who now worked as a research associate at the center, visibly tensed. Her physical recovery had been faster than her psychological one. Unlike Olivia, she still battled panic attacks and severe anxiety in enclosed spaces. "Are you suggesting he planned to significantly expand his operation?" she asked, choosing her words carefully. "The evidence points to that," confirmed Special Agent Raymond Torres. "The encrypted journals we managed to decode describe what he called the Invisible Academy, a concept for a network of facilities where he would keep what he termed exceptional minds isolated from the outside world." Olivia, who had maintained an impassive expression throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "We're talking about a scale far larger than we initially imagined." "That's right," Torres nodded. "Caldwell wasn't an opportunistic predator. He was systematic, patient, and had a long-term vision. For the last 9 years, he had been identifying and monitoring potential victims across the country, primarily female academics in specialized fields." Catherine Wilson, the third survivor who had remained silent until then, timidly raised her hand. Unlike Olivia and Melissa, Catherine had been voluntarily released by Caldwell years ago. The trauma of her captivity, combined with years of once forced by fear, had left deep scars. "Did you find any evidence of collaborators?" she asked in a barely audible voice. A tense silence filled the room. It was the question no one had wanted to ask explicitly, but it had hung in the air since details of Caldwell's operational scale began to emerge. "We have reason to believe Caldwell was not acting entirely alone," Torres finally admitted. "Financial records show periodic transfers to offshore accounts that we are still tracing. And at 2 of the properties we found evidence of multiple individuals being present during the construction of the facilities." Olivia exchanged a look with Sheriff Tanner, who was attending the meeting as a liaison between local and federal forces. They had privately discussed this possibility for months, but until now, the evidence had been circumstantial. "This changes the nature of our investigation," Tanner declared. "We're no longer just talking about the closed case of a lone predator, but a potential network that could still be operational." For Olivia, this revelation was a personal and professional crossroads. She had built her recovery around the idea that the Caldwell chapter was closed, that she could transform her trauma into useful knowledge from the safety of knowing he was behind bars. The possibility that others like him existed, perhaps watching, waiting, planning, threatened to destabilize the very foundations of her new life. "We need to re-examine everything from this perspective," she said, her analytical composure returning. "If Caldwell had collaborators, they likely share his philosophy and methods. That means there could be more facilities and potentially more victims we don't yet know about." In the weeks that followed, the Bennett Center partially transformed into an unofficial operations hub. With special authorization from the FBI, Olivia and her team were granted access to redacted evidence to identify patterns that traditional investigators might have missed. Melissa focused on the financial aspects, tracing money through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Catherine, whose captivity had been the briefest but also the earliest, provided a unique perspective on Caldwell's initial methods and contacts. One afternoon, while reviewing photographs recovered from one of Caldwell's storage devices, Olivia noticed something that had been overlooked. In several images taken at academic conferences, a man appeared in the background. Never as an official participant, always as an observer. It wasn't Caldwell, but his posture and pattern of observation were unsettlingly familiar. "I need access to the recordings of my prison visits with Caldwell," she requested to Torres during their next meeting. The request was unusual, but the case had long since surpassed standard protocols. 2 days later, Olivia was in a secure FBI room, meticulously reviewing the recordings of the 3 interviews she had conducted with Caldwell as part of her academic research. She wasn't looking for his explicit words, but for micro-expressions, fleeting looks, the subconscious patterns of communication. During her months in captivity, she had learned to read Caldwell with a precision no conventional interviewer could match. "Stop it here," she instructed during the review of the second interview. On the screen, Caldwell was answering a seemingly innocuous question about his early academic interests. "You see that movement with his left hand?" She pointed. "He did that specifically when he was hiding crucial information. And the slight tilt of his head is giving a coded response." Torres, initially skeptical, began to see the patterns once Olivia pointed them out. "Are you suggesting he was using these interviews to communicate with someone on the outside?" "Not directly," Olivia clarified, "but I believe he knew these recordings would eventually be reviewed by someone who understood his personal code. He's confirming the existence of what he called the Guardians." Meanwhile, back at the center, Melissa had identified a revealing financial pattern. All the transfers to the offshore accounts occurred exactly 3 days after a specific academic conference, she explained to the team. "And not just any conference," Olivia added, connecting the dots. "The ones focused on highly specialized areas: medieval paleography, computational linguistics, forensic anthropology. Fields with small, closed academic communities, environments where it would be easier to identify and isolate potential victims without arousing widespread suspicion. Catherine, who had remained relatively quiet during the investigations, unexpectedly requested a private meeting with Olivia and Agent Torres. "There's something I never mentioned," she confessed, visibly distressed. "When Caldwell let me go, he gave me specific instructions. He said if I ever spoke about what happened, the other guardians would take care of me. I always assumed it was an intimidation tactic, but now—" "Did he mention any specific names or locations?" Torres asked urgently. "No names," Catherine replied, "but he mentioned something about the observatory as his next project. He said it would be his masterpiece." A chill ran down Olivia's spine. The documents recovered from the bunker had contained cryptic references to a project named the Observatory, but investigators had assumed it was a surveillance system, not a physical facility. "We need to re-examine the uninspected properties," she urged, "especially those near actual astronomical observatories, where extensive underground construction could be camouflaged as part of legitimate scientific facilities." The investigation gained a new momentum. The FBI deployed specialized teams to examine the 5 remaining properties linked to Caldwell. Simultaneously, analysts meticulously reviewed records from academic conferences over the past decade, searching for the mysterious man in the photographs. 3 days later, Torres contacted Olivia in the middle of the night. "We found something in New Mexico near the Apache Point Observatory, a massive underground structure far more sophisticated than the previous bunkers. It's empty, but there's evidence of recent occupation." "How recent?" Olivia asked, now wide awake. "Days, maybe hours before our arrival," Torres replied, his voice grave. "And there's something else. We found a list. Names, locations, academic specializations. We believe they're potential targets." The implication was clear and terrifying. Caldwell's collaborators not only existed, but they were still active, possibly accelerating their plans now that the investigation was closing in. "I need to see that list," Olivia insisted. "I can identify patterns others might miss." "It's already on its way to Bozeman," Torres confirmed. "And Olivia, one of the names on the list is Diana Jackson." It all came full circle. Olivia's best friend, the one who had kept the search for her alive during her captivity, was now in the crosshairs of the same predators. The academic investigation had just become a race against time to prevent history from repeating itself. As dawn began to light up the Montana mountains, Olivia Bennett understood that her real battle was just beginning. The Invisible Academy had to be exposed and dismantled, and she, along with the other survivors, possessed the unique perspective and unwavering determination to see it through. The anthropology department at Montana State University bustled with the usual activity of a Friday afternoon when Olivia hurried in, heading straight for Diana Jackson's office. Several students tried to greet her. Her return to campus, even for sporadic visits, always generated interest. But the urgency in her expression deterred even the most enthusiastic. "You need to come with me. Now," she declared, entering Diana's office unannounced. Diana looked up from the exams she was grading, momentarily confused by the interruption. "Olivia, I have office hours until 5, and then—" "That doesn't matter now," Olivia interrupted, closing the door behind her. "You're in danger. We just found out you're one of the targets." Diana's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to understanding and finally to fear. As a close friend and collaborator at the Bennett Center, she knew the details of the ongoing investigation, but she had always perceived the threat as something abstract aimed at others. "Are you absolutely sure?" she asked, maintaining the professional composure that characterized her even in a crisis. "Your name was on the list recovered from the observatory," Olivia confirmed. along with details about your routines, publications, even the access code to your office. Diana instinctively glanced toward the door Olivia had just closed, suddenly aware of how vulnerable her everyday space had become. What do we do? For now, we get you out of here. Torres has arranged temporary protection while we develop a more permanent plan. In less than 20 minutes, Diana had gathered essential documents and a few personal items. A plainclothes FBI agent discreetly escorted them to an unmarked vehicle in the campus's rear parking lot. The operation was designed to avoid alarming the university community while ensuring Diana's immediate safety. "You'll be staying at the center for now," Olivia explained during the drive. "We've adapted the basement as a secure space. Melissa is already there." "Is Melissa in danger too?" Diana asked, her concern growing. "Everyone closely associated with the case is potentially at risk," Olivia replied with the blunt honesty she'd developed since her ordeal. "But you were a specific target, likely because of your connection to me and your visibility in the original investigation." When they arrived at the Bennett Center, they found the FBI team already in place. The main conference room had been transformed into a tactical operations center, with maps, timelines, and photographs covering the walls. "Dr. Jackson," Torres greeted her formally. "I'm sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances." "What do we know exactly?" Diana asked, quickly adapting to the situation with the same analytical acuity she applied to her academic research. "The recovered list contains 28 names," Torres explained, guiding them to a central board. "All academics in highly specialized fields, 18 women, 10 men, most with similar profiles, recognized in their fields, relatively isolated positions, minimal local family connections." "The classic Caldwell pattern," Olivia observed. "Have you identified his collaborators?" "We have 3 primary suspects," Torres replied, revealing a second board with surveillance photos. "Facial analysis confirmed that this man, Dr. Evan Whitaker, appears at multiple academic events where Caldwell identified potential victims." Olivia studied the image intently. The man was in his 50s with a distinguished appearance and a classic academic posture. He didn't trigger any specific memory, but his presence in the photographs was undeniable. "What do we know about him?" she inquired. "Visiting professor of theoretical physics with temporary affiliations at various universities over the last 12 years. No verifiable permanent residence. His academic record shows significant gaps. And most importantly, he was seen in Coeur d'Alene 3 days before we found Melissa." Melissa Dawson, who had been monitoring communications in a corner of the room, approached the group. "We also found financial transfers linking Whitaker to the acquisition of 2 properties near university campuses in Oregon and Illinois. Properties that weren't on Caldwell's original list," Torres added, "which suggests independent but coordinated operations." Diana processed the information, her expression growing more disturbed. "You're suggesting a structured network, not just occasional collaborators." "Exactly," Olivia confirmed. "The Invisible Academy wasn't just the delusion of a lone predator. It's an organization with a purpose, resources, and a reach we are only just beginning to understand." The silence that followed this statement was broken by Catherine Wilson, who entered the room accompanied by Sheriff Tanner. "I think I can identify one more," she announced, her voice trembling but resolute as she held up a folder. "I've been reviewing photographs from my time as a doctoral student before I was taken. This man attended 3 of my presentations." She held out a photograph. It showed a man of about 40 partially hidden among the audience at an academic symposium. Torres examined the image, a growing sense of alarm on his face. "That's Lawrence Merrick, our second suspect. When was this taken?" 6 months before my abduction," Catherine answered. I always assumed he was a visiting professor or a colleague from another department. The revelation confirmed their worst fears. The selection of victims was not random. It was a systematic, patient process developed over months or even years of observation. We need to get immediate protection on everyone on that list, Torres decided, already activating his communications gear. It won't be enough, Olivia interjected firmly. Reactive protection will only make them adjust their methods and timelines. We need to dismantle them proactively. What exactly are you proposing? Tanner questioned. A trap, Olivia replied without hesitation, using the very system they perfected. Olivia's proposal was audacious and controversial. She and Diana would act as bait in a mock academic symposium, creating an illusion of vulnerability while they maintained complete control of the environment. It's too risky, Torres predictably objected. We can't guarantee your safety. No one understands how they operate better than I do, Olivia countered. I know their patterns, their methods, their preferences. I can anticipate their moves because I have literally lived their process from the inside. After hours of intense debate, a modified plan was agreed upon. The Bennett Center would announce a closed symposium on the psychological mechanisms of survival in prolonged captivity, supposedly limited to vetted researchers. The information would be strategically leaked through academic channels the suspects were known to monitor. The next 5 days were a flurry of frantic preparations. The center was outfitted with advanced surveillance systems, and undercover agents were positioned as academic staff and maintenance crew. Diana and Olivia worked with behavioral specialists to develop presentations that would be irresistibly attractive to the perpetrators. The night before the event, while reviewing the final security details, Diana found Olivia alone in her office contemplating the map that detailed all the properties linked to the network. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. "No one would blame you for stepping away, for letting others carry on the fight." Olivia offered a faint smile, her eyes still fixed on the map. "You know what the hardest part of my captivity was? It wasn't the isolation, or even the constant terror. It was the feeling of powerlessness, the sense that someone else was in complete control of my destiny." She turned to face her friend directly. "I will not let that feeling define my life, or anyone else's. This is my way of taking back control, of turning what they did to me into the very thing that will destroy them." The day of the symposium dawned unusually cold for Montana at that time of year. The Bennett Center presented the appearance of ordinary academic activity, with registration at the entrance, coffee and snacks in the lobby, and detailed programs available for the 23 carefully selected and vetted participants. Diana's presentation was scheduled for 10:30, followed by Olivia's at 11:15. The expectation was that any outside observer would attempt an approach during the intermission or after the second presentation, when natural defenses would tend to relax. At 10:47, as Diana concluded her talk on linguistic patterns in survivor testimonies, a lighting technician, in reality an undercover agent, discreetly notified Torres. "Subject identified on the outer perimeter. Matches Whitaker's description." The plan was working. The predator had taken the bait. Olivia, receiving confirmation through a hidden earpiece, proceeded with her presentation as planned. Her lecture on cognitive adaptations in controlled captivity environments contained subtle elements designed specifically to appeal to the perpetrator's mindset. References to forced intellectual intimacy, to environments purified of worldly distractions, phrases that would resonate with the twisted philosophy of the Invisible Academy. At 12:03, during the question and answer session, the trap was sprung. Whitaker, who had entered using false credentials as a representative of an academic journal, asked a question that definitively confirmed his identity. Dr. Bennett, would you consider that under certain controlled circumstances, isolation could catalyze intellectual breakthroughs impossible to achieve in conventional academic settings? The question, phrased with studied neutrality, contained the exact kind of philosophical justification Caldwell had used repeatedly. Olivia maintained perfect composure, responding with apparent academic consideration while agents moved discreetly into position. A fascinating question, which deserves detailed exploration. Perhaps we could discuss it further during the luncheon. When Whitaker approached Olivia during the scheduled break, two agents intercepted him silently. The arrest was carried out with such discretion that most of the legitimate attendees never even noticed anything had occurred. Simultaneously, tactical teams executed search warrants at 3 locations associated with Whitaker. The network was beginning to crumble. The interrogation that followed revealed the entire structure. 7 individuals formed the core of the Invisible Academy, each responsible for identifying candidates, acquiring properties, and developing facilities in specific regions. Caldwell had merely been the most prolific and methodical of the group. For Olivia, Diana, and the other survivors, dismantling the network represented more than justice. It was the definitive reconquest of their safety and autonomy. They would no longer be defined by their victimization, but by their instrumental role in exposing and neutralizing a threat that would have continued indefinitely without their intervention. "It's over," Torres confirmed 3 weeks later during the task force's final meeting. "All identified suspects are in custody. All facilities have been located and secured." "It's not over," Olivia corrected him with serene determination. "We are just beginning to understand how seemingly functional people can build such elaborate systems to justify the unjustifiable. Our real work is just beginning." The Bennett Center would now begin its true mission, not only to support survivors but to develop tools to identify similar patterns early, preventing other invisible academies from ever taking root. For Olivia Bennett, the underground bunker where she had spent 412 days was no longer a prison that defined her, but a chapter in a much larger story of transformation and renewed purpose. 5 years later, the main auditorium at Columbia University was filled to capacity. Academics, mental health professionals, law enforcement agents, and graduate students occupied every available seat for the presentation of a book that had captured the nation's attention. Invisible Academies: Anatomy of Predatory Networks in Intellectual Environments. Co-authored by Olivia Bennett, Diana Jackson, Melissa Dawson, and Catherine Wilson. On stage, the 4 women presented a powerful image of transformation. They were no longer identified primarily as victims or survivors, but as pioneering researchers who had revolutionized the understanding of certain predatory patterns in academic communities. What began as a traumatic personal experience, Olivia began her presentation, has become an analytical framework with global applications. Over the last 5 years, the methodology developed by the Bennett Center has contributed to the identification and prevention of 17 potential cases in 9 countries. The path to that moment had been far from linear. After the dismantling of the Invisible Academy, each of the authors had processed her experience differently. Melissa had completed a doctorate in computational criminology, developing algorithms to detect patterns of surveillance and systematic selection in academic settings. Diana had incorporated her experience as a potential target into a revolutionary training program for university administrators. Catherine, initially the most reluctant to participate publicly, now ran specialized support groups for survivors of prolonged captivity. And Olivia, whose name had become inextricably linked to the case, had transformed her center from a local project in Montana into an international organization with offices in 4 countries. The most dangerous thing about networks like the Invisible Academy, Olivia continued, was not only their ability to hide, but their skill at camouflaging the monstrous under a cloak of intellectual justification. These are not impulsive perpetrators acting for immediate gratification. They are patient architects of entire systems designed to normalize the abominable. In the audience, Sheriff Robert Tanner, now retired, and Special Agent Raymond Torres watched with a mixture of professional pride and personal awe. What had begun as a missing person case in a small Montana county had evolved into a fundamental reconsideration of how institutions protect or fail to protect their most vulnerable members. The book we are presenting today, Diana interjected, taking the lead, is not merely a recounting of past horrors. It is a practical tool for recognizing and dismantling the elements that allow these networks to thrive unnoticed. The presentation continued with Melissa explaining the book's technological section, how the same digital tools that facilitated the identification and surveillance of potential victims could be repurposed to detect suspicious patterns of behavior. Academic institutions are particularly vulnerable, she noted, because they value research autonomy and intellectual privacy. These values are fundamental and must be preserved, but not at the cost of basic safety. Catherine, who had remained relatively in the background during most previous public appearances, surprised many by taking the microphone with renewed confidence. "For years, my silence was imposed by fear," she began, her voice firm. "Then it was chosen as a survival mechanism. Eventually, it became a comfortable habit. But silence, while protective on an individual level, can be complicit on a systemic level." Her section of the book, Reclaimed Voices, featured anonymous testimonies from survivors of various cases, creating a choral tapestry that revealed consistent patterns impossible to detect in isolated incidents. After the formal presentation, during the question and answer session, a young graduate student posed the question that many were thinking, but few dared to ask directly. How do you handle the fact that your public identities are so tied to your experiences as victims? Don't you fear that this will permanently define how the academic world perceives you? A brief silence followed the question. The four women exchanged glances, a silent communication perfected through years of collaboration. Finally, Olivia responded, "We are not defined by what happened to us, but by what we chose to create from it. Every survivor determines their own narrative. For us, transforming trauma into preventative knowledge has been our choice. Other survivors choose different paths, equally valid." She paused, carefully considering her next words. "As for how we are perceived, that concern followed me for the first year after my escape. I was afraid of being eternally the woman from the bunker. But I discovered something interesting. Those who try to reduce you to your worst experience are usually doing so because they cannot comprehend your resilience, and their limitations are not my responsibility." The answer generated a spontaneous ovation that surprised even the presenters. That night after the event, the four authors gathered privately in Olivia's temporary Manhattan apartment. Without the cameras, the journalists, and the academic formalities, they were simply four women bound by an extraordinary experience, but also by a friendship forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. "Remember our first group meeting?" Melissa asked, pouring wine into glasses Diana had brought for the occasion. "We were so broken, each in our own way." "Speak for yourself," joked Catherine, who had developed an unexpected sense of humor as part of her recovery. "I was perfectly functional, just slightly traumatized and moderately paranoid." The shared laughter had a tone of release, of a complicity that only those who have walked through hell together can fully understand. "Here's to us," Diana proposed, raising her glass. "To the survivors who became researchers, who became friends." "And to those who didn't survive," Olivia added solemnly. to Catherine Mercer and the others whose stories we will never fully know. The silence that followed was heavy, but not sorrowful. It was an acknowledgement of tragedy and loss, but also of the purpose found in its aftermath. "What's next?" Catherine asked eventually. "The book is out. The tour ends in 2 months. Do we all go back to our separate lives?" "We'll never be truly separate," Olivia replied, "but I think it's time to expand our focus." She unfolded a map on the coffee table, revealing markers in multiple countries. These are places where variations of similar networks have emerged, not exactly like the Invisible Academy, but with enough structural similarities to be concerning. "Are you suggesting we become an international investigative team?" Melissa asked, half joking, half serious. "I'm suggesting that the knowledge we've developed shouldn't be limited to academic circles or American agencies," Olivia clarified. "There are colleagues in these countries who have identified troubling patterns but lack the conceptual framework to contextualize them." The conversation continued late into the night, drafting plans, considering possibilities, sometimes drifting into shared memories or personal anecdotes. It was the kind of camaraderie that only emerges between people who have experienced the unimaginable together. The next morning, as they had breakfast before heading to their respective destinations, Diana posed the question she had been considering overnight. "Do you think Marcus Caldwell knows what we've accomplished? The impact we've had?" Olivia considered the question as she watched the sunrise over the New York skyline, so different from the Montana mountains, but equally imposing. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "and I'm surprised to find that I no longer care. For a long time I would imagine his reactions to every step we took, as if he still held some power over me, over us. But at some point, without even realizing it, I stopped thinking of him as a significant presence." "The final liberation," Melissa commented with an understanding smile. "Exactly," Olivia nodded. "The day I disappeared on that trail, I lost my freedom. The day I escaped the bunker, I reclaimed it physically. But I think it is only now, 5 years later, that I have fully reclaimed my mental freedom." That afternoon, as they each boarded flights to different destinations, Olivia returning temporarily to Bozeman, Diana to Chicago, where she now taught, Melissa to Washington, D.C., where she collaborated with the FBI, and Catherine to Seattle, where she ran her support center. They shared a common certainty. Their work was far from over. It was just beginning. What had begun as an individual tragedy had transformed into a collective mission with a global impact. From her seat by the window, Olivia gazed down at the clouds blanketing the world below. Her mind drifted back to the dawn that broke after her escape. The first time she had seen the Montana sky after 412 days of artificial darkness. The overwhelming sensation from that day, a mixture of liberation, vulnerability, and determination, had since matured into something deeper, more steadfast. The conviction that even the darkest experiences, when processed and channeled constructively, could illuminate the way for others. She was on her way to meet Catherine in Bozeman for the anniversary. 6 years since their unique academy had held its first session. The affirmative replies had come almost instantly. 6 years since 4 women connected by trauma had begun to reimagine their identities, not as passive victims but as active agents of change. As the plane began its descent into Montana, Olivia reflected on how places absorb our stories. Bozeman was no longer simply the place where she had been abducted, where she had been buried alive, or even where she had escaped. It was where she had discovered her deepest purpose, where she had transformed the unthinkable into the constructive. The circle was closing, not as a suffocating noose, but as a cycle of renewal. What Marcus Caldwell had never understood, what the Invisible Academy with its distorted philosophy had failed to grasp, was that the human spirit, when truly free doesn't need bunkers or systems of control to reach its highest potential. It needs the very opposite: authentic connection, a shared purpose, and the freedom to transform even the darkest experiences into a source of light for others.